We're going to talk about the experiences of agricultural and livestock production, as well as innovations in the Mixteca, Oaxaca, Mexico region. To this end, for this works in Mexico, we have been working with several allies in different types of institutions, like, for instance, the Metropolitan University, also the Forestry, Agriculture, and Livestock Production Research Institute, like INIFAP, Fondo para la Paz, and different organizations like Ejidos Union from the area of La Mixteca. We have been working with collaborators and allies directly into the field as well. So in order to identify and understand the conditions in which we're working at, I will explain myself. We're working at Oaxaca. Oaxaca is in the southern region of Mexico. Usually, those conditions are tropical. However, Oaxaca is split into 8 different regions, geopolitical regions. It has with more than 19 ethnic groups, and it has tropical, subtropical, and high valley regions. Mixteca is where we have more high valley macro regions, and the temperatures range between 0 to 32 degrees Celsius. It is a state with many different conditions. I'm showing you some pictures of La Mixteca region, so you may realize that this is a very high region and it has very little rainfall. Well, this is the landscape that we can see throughout these months during spring or during the dry season. You see the soils are quite washed out, causing problems. And these are the municipalities where we're working at, shown in black. And in the case of rainfall, we're working with 400 millimeters up to 600. In Tlaxialco region, we can have a little bit more rainfall. However, most part of the territory is around 400 or 600 millimeters of rainfall, according to the domestic statistics. Also, in fact, we are having less rain. We also have, say, cool and humid climates in these regions, and also higher regions in higher altitudes, like, for instance, the high Mixteca region with 1,000 up to 3,000 meters of elevation. Those are the areas where we're working at. As you can see, the rainfall level at different municipalities is shown in this chart. We're working with different growers in different regions, and what we have been finding so far is a very low rainfall level between 550 millimeters a year. And we also have quite clayish soil conditions, as well as other combinations. Nevertheless, clayish soils are the most outstanding ones, and these are the kind of plots where we're working at. Well, talking a little bit and perhaps refreshing these models, because you might have seen them in other presentations, just to talk to those of you who do not have this information from the Mixteca region. The systems that we have where we're working we're working in the highlands. We're also working in the hillsides with slopes from 9 to 10%, and also on sides of mountains. And we have different agricultural production systems. For instance, here we have access to mechanization. In the high lands, we have still oxes, and on the one hand, we prepare mechanically the soil, and then we plant manually. And then in the side hills, we also use the oxes and manual planting, as well as in the top hillsides. And here we're trying to improve some mechanized systems. Thanks to Masagro program, for instance, we're using already the drill planters. They are manual, they are mobile and pretty useful. And in here we have been working also with some machinery that was previously used in Africa. You already know about it. Now, livestock systems, usually we're working with free grazeland. Very little of the production is under shelter. Both sheep, as well as goats and bovine livestock production. Most part of the times is free grazing instead of having them at the stables. On the upper systems, we have goats. In the lower lands, we have other animals. So the system is mixed. It's a mixed production system, milk and meat production with sheep and goats. And we also have an agricultural predominant production based on bean, wheat, and maize, and also fodder production through stubble production from maize, a little bit of oats, and a little bit of alfalfa. And in this zone, we're also growing wheat. So there is a little bit also of wheat stubble. And we also have been working based upon this model. This is the way in which we have done our interventions in the territory. We use this hub model where we use a research platform trying to look for the spaces or the production areas for fodder and maize grain in this case. And this is very important because in the region we had about 5 years already working with the promotion of conservation agriculture, and we had found some specific focusing areas, like for instance, vertical tillage, also crop residue management, and where we're working with the CLCA projects is precisely in those areas. So the research work continues in these two lines. We had already made some improvements in the tillage area. So this led us to the fact that we already have modules and the research platform which are connecting information with the different growers, so that now we have an app or an extension of these works based upon the linkages that we have formed in our events, thanks to the extension workers in the different areas in order to truly have an impact. So in this way, people's communication among the technicians and the growers is more and more important, so that now we can truly have a good impact. What we saw at the beginning of our intervention project was that it was necessary to have a conventional planting maize area with some maize and some coverage crops and the 80-centimeter rows, and then to split that plot into 2 plots. So in these areas, in these strips of 10 centimeters, we could use a mix of fodders so that we would not only be thinking in having high protein fodder production, but also considering it in a more comprehensive way. So we started working with canola, with Evo, and we eat sunflower as well as with clover, sorry, as a mix. And we also thought that we could be mixing during October after the last rainfall fell in September. We could use in terms of rotation, clover, canola, blanc radish, Evo, and oats. At the beginning, we found some difficulties in finding the right mixture, but we thought that in the contour, we would be using these hedgerows or living barriers, because most part of the plots where we're working at have runoffs, because we're working also in the slopes. Remember that we're using the side hills and the side hilltops. So in here, we are using bean, sunflower, triticale, navajita grass, and radish, as well as other oil seed products. These were the first results. We started having maize production in the areas with more water holding capacity or that were planted longer with the native races. We can see already some further production, canola as well as radish, canola already flowering. And in here, we were already cutting some runners of it because the mix has to be well adapted to the circumstances. So this is what we were planning on at the beginning. Then we started adapting those crops in a different way. And here we found that small plots, which are pretty easy to find really in this territory. Land tenure in this area is 200 square meters. Those plots are really, really tiny. So it worked very fine. But when we had already access to mechanization, doing this kind of planting did not work at all. It was not convenient at all. So we had to make changes. And these are some of the production units: goats in the highest areas, a little bit of sheep in the lower lands, oxes, and bovine cattle in different areas of the region. So we identified that we needed to change a little bit our mindset, doing something that was more comprehensive. So we prepared a menu of technological innovations that would enable us to do adjustments in the process along the way. So we considered that minimum tillage and coverage with the stubble would be permanent. We also worked with the integrated weed management, rotation crops, fraction to fertility in inter crops, hedgerows, MAP or pest management, and densities and different arrangements, understanding that maize is a main product, is the core of all these systems. So we wanted to find a solution for it. We had already identified it as a need. What we do when we leave the stubble for covering the soils? Well, at the same time, we also need feed for the livestock production. So we said, okay, let's start preparing green fodder, controlled grazing, nutritional blocks, silage, hay making, and some other mechanized production systems. So but first, we started working with the mixtures instead of having associated crops, monoculture, multiple cultures, like for instance, a strip of canola, a strip of clover, a strip of sunflower, maize with an other associated crop. And what we found at the field level is that in those tiny spaces, the production of intercropping was pretty good. It worked very well. And in most areas, what was better was to produce a mixture of fodder, just thinking in terms of feed. So we had these mixtures: Evo, triticale, wheat, and oats, and covering the soil during winter time so that we would be able to plant later on. For instance, where you can see the sunflowers, we can have maize with sunflower, thinking in how can we done also in a mechanized way. As for livestock production, in these units, we have been working with 496 animals in 31 primary production units. These are very small production units with very few animals. And we saw that 26% of these production units have a good animal health management. However, 74% of them do not have any kind of health management. So when there is no management of supplementary nutrition or an animal health management, we can check the weight, for instance, of these animals, and we see how in the blue line, we have the first weighing, and after 350 or 90 days, as you can see, most of those animals lost weight. There is no weight gain, with exception of the youngest animals. So we understand that growers are trying to protect the young animals, newborns, or the ones that are at the lactancy period when they are being weaned. But for instance, that's for bovines, but for goats, even though the weight drop, goats resist better the lack of management and pretty surely the lack of nutrition due to their high metabolic capacity. So weight gain is more evident in goats than in any of the other animal species. And then here with bovines, we found exactly the same. So besides the animal health management during this term, we have seen that at COVID area, there has been an impact on animals as well. So that's why they have not been managed properly. As for agricultural production, we have found 8 modules, 40 extension areas, and we have reached 250 units being impacted in the last project during the last year. We have been working with monocultures like Evo, triticale wheat, and peas, and also different mixtures that we have been adapted based upon the current circumstances. So the mixture of canola with Evo is very good. The mixture of canola and Evo and clover is also very good. So these are the yields results. At the modules, what we have seen is that grain also, it is experiencing a drop against the control checks in both years. People are strongly accepting this new type of management because besides grain, we are having a higher yield in terms of fodder, which was not existing before. So at least they have feed for their animals during a month, during the strongest dry season. So this is important. These are the yields that we are obtaining in average at all the municipalities where we're working at with native maize cultivars. As we see this comparison in the extension areas, our modules and the conventional management in the area, we have found that in terms of grain, it is exactly the same. Those areas where we're only managing maize are having an increase in grain yields. However, in the extension areas as well as in the innovation area of the modules, we have now grain and fodder at different production units. So besides this, we have published several manuals, for instance, a manual on multi-nutritional blocks, a manual on the body condition of bovine caprine and cows, and also a manual on how to determine the ruminant's age, and a process of ruminant digestion manual with some educational institutions. As for the information, we have been working with 600 already trained growers and with the 2 programs that we have in the country, which is called Planting Life and Production for Well-Being. So in fact, we are having a greater impact than the one that we identified at the beginning, because the technicians, when they go out to the field, are also promoting the work that we have been doing in the extension areas, in the modules, as well as in the research platform that we have at La Mixteca region. So this was pretty brief. I hope that my explanation was clear. And if you have any questions, please go ahead, feel free to ask. Thank you, Jaime. Thank you very much. And while we wait, I would like to say that you mentioned several challenges: environmental, agricultural challenges, but I'm also interested in learning a little bit about the economic circumstances of those growers. What's the market like? What's the impact of that market in the soil's health, in their agricultural practices, as well as in the possibility of forming part of these kind of interventions that you showed us? Look, what we have seen so far is that these growers are working in an environment where the value chain is completely disarticulated. that there is no organization whatsoever. There are no rules, no processes ruling over buying and selling animals. So it is basically linked to the financial needs of households. So this has a huge impact. So these livestock wholesalers buy their animals at a very low price, and then they market them or sell them for cuisine purposes, for dishes. For instance, barbecue a goat cooked in a clay pot, and which is very popular in this region. However, we have been noticing that the project has identified some business models. If we start working in association with the growers, I think it's worthwhile to begin working on associations of growers, creating grower associations. We will try to promote this work. We have been working with Walmart Foundation, and they are promoting access to markets. This is where we want to take our growers to, how to create organizational schemes which are functional enough for them to have a better way of marketing their products. On the other hand, on the soil aspects, what we have seen is that because there is an increase in the use of fertilizers, there is also an increase in the price of agricultural input. Having these associated crops or intercropping will be quite helpful in order to lower the input costs. On the other hand, we have seen that the best results in grain yields have been found where we plant further in all the plot in terms of crop rotation for the fall winter season. Later on, we plant maize on that same plot. So in this way, we can have a better balance in order to keep maize stubble on the soil, covering the soil, improve the soil condition, and have access to feed at the same time. So we believe that this is going to be the system that will prevail, and that will lead us to have a better acceptation of the conservation agriculture principles.